It can't be that freaking hard, right? Getting healthy, being healthy, staying healthy. I believe that having optimal health is the pathway to living a truly fulfilled life. I'm your host, Ashley Mythen, a qualified naturopath who's passionate about finding solutions to your health problems, because your health is my business and healthy starts here. Welcome to the show. This episode is sponsored by Kombucha Town. Located in Washington State, USA, their mission is to challenge the industry food system with premium kombucha tea beverages that empower people to live healthy and happy lives. You can find more information at kombuchatown.com. To get 15% off any product that you order through kombuchatown.com, type in Ashley15. That's ASHLEIGH 15. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode. I'm really excited to have Rachael Torcasio here with me. We did a podcast a while ago on grief, and I'm just so excited to have her back. She is a warm, friendly, passionate, and holistic psychologist. She takes pride in her raw and real therapeutic approach with her clients. Rachael's passion is in helping people develop a deeper understanding of how their life experiences have shaped their personalities, beliefs, emotions, and behaviours. She has a special interest in working with people who have experienced grief and loss, self-healers valuing personal growth, or those navigating other mental health challenges and transitions in their lives. Rachael works collaboratively with her clients to explore how these things have impacted their relationships, self-esteem, body, and day-to-day lives, building their capacity to cope and have an overall improved quality of life. And today I'm really excited to have Rachael on the show to speak on the gut-mind connection. She's also a dear friend of mine, and I know that she's had some personal experience with this journey, which I'm super excited to have her on the show. So thank you, Rachael, for joining us here.
Good morning. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this show today.
Oh, anytime. First of all, I'd love to hear a bit about your passion between this particular subject. Like, where did that begin, and why is that so important to you, the gut-brain connection, as a practitioner and as for yourself?
Mm-hmm. And I guess a combination of things, being not just professional, I think my passion really developed when I experienced firsthand the impact that this mind-gut connection really has on our wellness and our day-to-day life and all the things, I guess, that we're going to talk about in the rest of the podcast today.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's so important. So when did that kind of click for you? Like when did that all begin?
So I had about 3.5 years ago, I had a significant loss in my life. So following that loss, naturally, my body sent into, I guess, something it didn't expect. So a long time, I think I really oscillated between being quite detached from my body, but also being in like a really heightened state of arousal as well. And then COVID came.
Yeah.
And where everyone was kind of faced to sit with things perhaps they hadn't faced in the past, things quietened down, and I started to reconnect with my body and really recognize that some things had changed within my body, particularly in my digestive system and just different types of pain that I was experiencing that I'd never experienced before.
And so let's talk about that a little bit more in depth. So obviously we're talking about that gut-brain connection. So how is there a connection there? And, for people who maybe this is the first time they're hearing that there's a connection there, how does that happen?
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing is that our gut is essentially our second brain, and no one really knows that. I mean, more recently there's research telling us, your food affects your mood, or your gut health affects your mental health, vice versa. Imbalances in one of these areas creates imbalances in the other. And these are kind of connected by something that's called the vagus nerve. So the main reason they influence one another is there's one of them, I think it is the major nerve system in the body connects the brain to the gut.
And there's lots of different kind of, neurotransmitters that are also made in the gut, such as serotonin and things like that. So it makes sense that our gut health is imperative for our brain health, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's something like 90 to 95% of our serotonin, which is our feel-good hormone or / neurotransmitter. This is the one that regulates our mood, and that's where it's made, in our gut.
Which
so
is
if we haven't got that health, absolutely. I had no idea until I actually started, psychology and studying that journey. And I remember hearing about it in my studies, but it's really not until, again, as I said, you experience firsthand the impact of that you really start to pay attention.
So when did you really make that? Because, I know we actually have talked a bit more in depth about, your experience grief, and you've shared information in that podcast that we did together. But when did you notice that kind of digestive, because obviously you've studied it and you knew that there was that component there, but for yourself, you mentioned before that it wasn't until you experienced it. So what did you actually start to notice in the physical sense?
Yeah. So the main thing that I really noticed was, I just stopped being as regular as I was going to the bathroom.
Very simply.
That was the main thing. And I know that I used to be quite regular and how many times a day I would go, and, without going into too much detail.
You're welcome to. This is not too much TMI in this podcast. We can talk about this stuff. Bowel emotions are very important.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's very important what we're talking about today, isn't it?
Yes.
It just changed. The consistency changed. It really slowed down a lot. It was different shape, different sizes to what it was usually, which was much easier. I've never had any kind of issues with going to the bathroom, like regularity or anything like that until then.
And for people listening, and again, like this can be, I know we're talking to patients, and this is a space where I've become very comfortable talking with patients because bowel motions essentially are the factor that we can look at to know what kind of state the gut health is in. And a great place to start is looking at the Bristol stool chart, which is basically a nice kind of format or kind of protocol to look at to go, okay, yes, I'm noticing changes, but what does that mean? And I'll make sure to put a link down in the show notes to that just so people can have a look and start getting comfortable in that area. And like you said, when you've been regular all your life and then all of a sudden this changes, you start to take notice, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And then was there any other kind of digestive symptoms that you noticed apart from the regularity of your bowel motions?
Nothing from memory, but to be honest, that's the main one. It was just really evident. I mean, maybe a little bit of pain and discomfort, that kind of thing going on because things weren't happening as quickly as they needed to.
And obviously there was a lot emotionally going on, so we can definitely see that was the connection there on that level.
Absolutely. Yeah. I guess it's not directly linked to digestion, but I did notice a lot of other aches and pains in my body. I was going to the chiropractor regularly. My diaphragm was kind of popping out, and I guess that was because of being in a heightened state of arousal. So then I started to kind of connect the dots. Hang on a minute. Something's going on. They're all kind of happening at the same time. What is it? What's happening?
And it's really got to do with that HPA axis as well, that fight or flight, doesn't it?
And that's the most well-known link, isn't it? That people kind of, we've all heard about it. What's the fight, flight, freeze kind of link? What does that mean? I guess now's a good time to go into a little bit what it is.
Absolutely, 100%. A nice little, I was just segueing our way into there.
Lovely. Well, I guess before I come to that, maybe just coming back to the vagus nerve a little bit.
Yes, please do, yeah.
Just it'll give a bit of context, I think, for that fight, flight, because that's the response. What do they call it? Now I've gone completely blank.
The HPA.
Or what people know, it's our autonomic nervous system, so it's reactive reaction. So vagus nerve, basically it's a superhighway of a neural network that sends messages back and forwards between our brain and our stomach. We all know if we drink a coffee, increases our level of anxiety in some of us. So that's a connection of what's gone into the stomach, how it's affecting our, anxiety in the rest of our body. Or we've all had that feeling of being really nervous and then needing to rush to the bathroom quicker.
Butterflies in the stomach.
Exactly.
Or even, irritable bowel syndrome. There's an emotional component there. Irritable.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess when we look at the fight-flight reflex, essentially that's what it is. It's just autonomic. Normally our bodies look out for threat, right? So they're programmed to look for this threat, based on our ancestors' out in the wild hunting for their dinner kind of thing when you look back, this goes back as far as that. So the brain's constantly receiving all these messages. So it can either be we can be under threat from our external environment, but we can also be under threat from our internal environment, in particular our stomach. So if something is happening that is threat, as we know, some of us know, all of our resources kind of in our body are directed to our bigger organs for survival. So if we have to run away, all the blood rushes out to our limbs so we can run. So any kind of non-essential for survival things that happen in the body that kind of slow down or stop, they're not seen as necessary to get a person through whatever the threat it is that they're facing at the time.
100%, because back in the day, it might have been that bear we're running from, and so our digestion switches off, doesn't it? Because it's like, well, we don't need to eat right now. We need to run or fight this threat.
It's not important to process whatever's in our stomach. Yeah, it's not important. It's amazing. And it does that automatically.
It's amazing. Yeah. And that's, I think, a beautiful thing, to touch on as well, that this is a natural response within our body that is there to protect us. Often there's that kind of, kind of friction, I suppose, or, maybe a bit of a negative connotation with that response, but it's all natural. It's there to protect us.
Absolutely. And if I can relate it to my personal experience too, lack of stress and trauma, depression, anxiety following what I was experiencing, that was my body detached from itself or was in this heightened state of arousal to survive.
Yes. And what happens when you stay in that heightened state of arousal too long? Could you talk a bit about that? Yeah,
sure. So I guess these being in a heightened state of arousal, you can probably talk more to the effect it has on the bacteria in our guts. But I guess, it can create inflammation and disease. And what we know about that kind of thing, that long-term inflammation and disease, it can create other health issues, chronic pain. You mentioned irritable bowel syndrome before. Can you think of any others that I've overlooked?
Heaps, pretty much. Pretty much all those things, like any kind of inflammation, and depending on what our genetic predisposition is like, basically what that means is in times of stress, certain genes can be switched on as well. And these could be autoimmune components. These could be, things that genetics don't necessarily mean it's definitely going to happen, but in some cases it can be switched on due to certain lifestyle or, dietary things or stress and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's that nature-nurture thing, isn't it? So you might have a predisposition and then you add the actual environmental, so the nature part of it and the combination of both. Yeah, they can lead to things like fibromyalgia is something that is really they're looking at now, the link between the mental, emotional connection to the physiological connection of like long-term chronic pain that in some people it just really never goes away.
And I love that they're touching on that now because we're more than, two-dimensional beings. There's so much more than just the physical component. So I love that that's now being taken seriously. And I love, Louise Hay, who looks at digestion as how we digest our emotions. So that's a nice, I love that kind of side of thing as well. So, that's perfect way, actually, hearing is a perfect way to describe my experience, isn't it? That I hadn't digested my emotions. I spent 2 years, staying busy, dealing with, just life and just life after loss, those things that you naturally have to face. And then it was like, you have to sit with these emotions now. Yes, it is time.
We're going to keep them stuck in your body until you figure out a way to kind of cleanse or do something to nurture and take care of it.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because for our digestion to work properly, like you were touching on before, in times of stress, all that energy goes to our extremities and to help ourselves, survive that particular stress. So our digestive system has to be in a state of relaxation for it to function properly. So that's really important to consider.
Very important to consider. And when we're in the fight or flight response, fighting doesn't mean out there fighting or doing something. It's just a heightened state of arousal. I think it's really important to kind of clarify for people who aren't clear what that means. And running away doesn't mean running away. That's avoiding or detaching And some of these responses, again, we don't know we're doing them. It's the body's way of helping us get through something really, stressful or traumatic or frightening or whatever it might be in a person's life.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think that's a beautiful way to put it as well. So when you're talking to patients, obviously I'm assuming this is something that you keep in the back of your mind. So how do you talk to patients about this? Like, how do you, when they're, do you bring this up with them about the digestion, how that's important and things like that?
Yes, certainly. So when we look at, for example, a patient who is experiencing depression. So what we know about depression is it's a lot of low mood. People don't have the energy. They find it difficult to get out of bed some days. Their day-to-day routine kind of ends up being non-existent because they just don't have the motivation and the drive. So we start kind of from scratch at looking at a person's routine, and the basic things we look at are things like diet, movement, and sleep. So 3 really important kind of autonomic processes that happen in the body and brain as well, but the things that we kind of end up neglecting if we're having mental health difficulties.
And it can be a cycle, can't it? It can be like we're not feeling good, so we gravitate to perhaps things that aren't so good for us, and then it makes us feel worse. It can be a bit of a cycle, can't it?
Yeah, and not only going for things that just, comfort food, but sometimes it's the convenience food because it's there quickly.
Yes.
We don't want to cook.
Yes.
So, and it's cheaper than ordering in certain meals from certain meal companies as well. So, sometimes we just can't help what we're going for, but with the education. So that's really where I start with clients, is a bit of psychoeducation about just the influence that these things have on how we feel.
And what's one of the top tips that you like to give people's beginning on this kind of journey of connecting with their physical health to their emotional health?
Yeah, the first thing is to listen to the body.
Yes.
I mean, easier said than done, but if you just take time to kind of sit with it, it has messages for us, whether it's sensations and to not be judgmental of them. So I often love to do like a body scan where I just get a person to close their eyes and really tune in, just scan from the head down slowly, notice any sensations, whether it feels good or bad or don't put a judgment on it, just be curious. What message has it got for you? And we often know what the message is when we take the time to sit and listen.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I also love to suggest to patients to begin a mindful food diary. And basically that's just writing, again, getting to the point where you're obsessive, writing out every little thing. I think there's a little line there to be careful not to cross, but writing down what you eat and then how you feel, whether it's a physical issue that comes up that day or you're more anxious or anything, or change in bowel motions. And again, those 2 things, I think the body scanning and writing down, physically, I think is a great way to begin that connection between, yes, there is something happening between my food, when I eat, and how I feel.
And because we're so busy in our lives, we've got so many other things that we're doing, it's hard to know what it is, but food's really something we don't usually consider.
No, not at all. It's like you said before, it's one of the foundational things, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So what is something that you wish you would have known before, like obviously learning the actual what happens between the gut and brain? What is something that you wish you had have known about that?
I knew it existed, but I wish I really knew it existed.
You wish you really kind of had that kind of cemented in. Yeah.
Truly, like it, I guess I took for granted regular bowel movements.
Yes.
Who would have thought?
Absolutely. And it not only does it like it feels better, right? But it also, if we're not having a regular bowel motion, we're reabsorbing all the things that our body's trying to get rid of, which again creates that kind of toxicity and adds to any kind of inflammatory pathways. So, it's really good for our body to be letting go emotionally and physically of the things we no longer need.
Certainly is. Yeah.
So is there any kind of red flags, do you think, when a patient comes in talking to and you think, okay, gut health and things like, is there any kind of red flags that you think about or for people to take notice of that might come up?
Yeah, certainly. I think our level of tiredness, just our overall just emotional landscape. If we're feeling low energy, low mood, kind of flat, it's not just about things happening in our external environment. It's about our internal environment as well. So I think the importance is seeing the duality of that, like nature, nurture, inside and outside. Essentially, any mental health or just life challenges that we're finding it difficult to face could indicate that with a better diet and lifestyle choices around that could help us to be able to cope differently and hopefully better.
You've been listening to part 1 of How Your Gut Talks to Your Brain with Rachael Torcasio. Stay tuned for part 2.